Morning, I'm Rory and welcome back to Sawyer Academy. In this video we are talking MOF, or minimum opening face. In other words, where do we start cutting a log? In the previous video we talked about the different situations where you might want to use MOF versus BOF. In this video we're only talking about what MOF is. Your first cut into the log will remove the slab, and what you're left with is a log with an opening face. And here's a picture of what that is. The size of that opening face is going to be dictated by what you set as your MOF. So when you're using a scanner, that's going to be a number that you enter into the computer. If you don't have a scanner, it's going to be more, you're going to be sawing more by feel as far as how much slab you want to remove to be left with how big of an opening face. And we'll get more into this in a second. Now your second follow-up cut on the same face is going to turn that opening face into a live edge board. And well, here's a picture of that as well. So the way to think about MOF is less so about the size of the opening face, but the size of the dimensioned lumber that's going to come out of that first board. So if we go back to that first picture of the opening face on the log, we can imagine the size of the board that's going to come out of that opening face. Now, how that board is made from that live edge board is going to come down to your edger and your trimmer. They're the ones who are actually making the board. The way you can kind of think about what MOF is where do I start cutting a log? If I take too shallow of a cut, I'm left with a thin slab and a small opening face and perhaps a board that I can't really do anything with. But if I were to cut too deep into the log on the first cut, my slab's much too heavy. I probably could have gotten a board out of this, and now I'm left with this opening face on the log that's going to be way too big for what I need. Now when you're sawing with the scanner or doing what I call computer assisted sawing, the computer will usually set your MOF up for you and will bring your log to your saw line automatically. It's not something you have to do. Now what if you're sawing and you don't have a scanner? With the scanner, the computer's going to take care of it for you. It's going to bring your log to your saw line and it's going to set up your first cut. If you don't have a scanner, like I said earlier, the minimum requirement is basically you need a laser line on the ceiling, and that's going to show you your saw line, and you're going to bring the log manually into that saw line. So now you're back to the situation where can I start cutting this log? With the laser line showing you where you are going to cut this log. And that's going to be a lot more touch and go and come down to just more experience. You're going to need to play around with it a lot over the first few days that you're doing that, and see kind of how that light curtain or how that laser line translates to what kind of opening face you get, which is hard to explain, but you'll pick it up pretty quickly, because the further up this intersection is on your log, the heavier and the bigger the slab you're going to get. So if you're cutting off big slabs, someone's going to be telling you that you're cutting slabs way too heavy or too big of slabs. As well, if you're too light, if you're always just kind of kissing the side of the log and your intersection is closer to like the apex of the circle, your slabs are going to be way too thin. They'll probably be getting caught on a lot of the equipment. And this edging board that you're cutting now, you're going to be left with not a board there, and then your edger guy is going to kind of start to complain and stuff like that. So without a scanner, without being able to enter MOF into a computer and just using a laser line on the ceiling, it's, as bad as it is to say, it's going to come down to just more experience and more time sawing and making mistakes and cutting too heavy slabs and cutting too light slabs. And you'll just have to get used to, again, kind of where this laser light, where this intersection on the log is and how far up kind of from the apex of the log that intersection is. And that probably doesn't make any sense, but once you're in that situation, that's what you're looking for. You're looking basically where this intersection, where does that laser line intersect the log, and how does that translate to this opening face on a log. And you're really not gonna, I can't explain that very well at a chalkboard. That's something that you're gonna have to, you should pick up fairly quickly once you're kind of in that situation. So if you're going into a situation where you have to saw without a scanner, it's not that big of a deal, it's not that hard. It's gonna take you more times and you're gonna make more mistakes along the way. But after a few days, you'll kind of get a feel for where that log is in the saw line and how does that translate to an opening face. So let's look at a real world example. So here we have a brand new log on face 1. We're gonna make our first cut and the slab's gonna come off and go to the chipper. We'll be left with our opening face. A second consecutive cut is gonna give us a live edged board. Now inside that live edge board is going to be a dimension board that will be made later on. But what our MOF is doing is dictating the minimum size that that board should be. So in this case, and in the case that I typically use, is going to be an MOF of 3 inches by 6 feet. And what that means is that this board that will be made will be a minimum 3 inches wide and 6 feet long. Now it's important to note that the board can and usually is wider and longer than that. MOF just keeps you from going below the threshold. And that threshold is dictated by your saw bill or cut list that comes from your customer. So if our customer is buying 6x6 and 1x12 and all these different products, we need to find what the smallest product is. And in my case, and in most cases, it's going to be a 1x3 that's 6 feet long. So what our MOF is doing is keeping us from making, let's say, a 1x2 4 feet long. So this board, we're going to send it to the edger. If he can't get a 3-inch wide board, or the trimmer can't get a 6 foot long board, we're just wasting everybody's time. We've wasted 2 cuts. We've wasted sending a board to those guys, and all of it's ending up in the chipper anyway. So then now we're losing recovery. So the way to think of MOF is just what the smallest product can be and not necessarily what this will be every time. So let's say in this case, this board is actually going to be, it's going to be 4 inches wide and it's going to be 10 feet long. And what dictates that the most is the profile of the log. So the way to think about it is a log with a lot of taper, so it's tapered significantly, this board will be much shorter. So the more taper, the shorter the log. And if this log were uniform, like a perfect cylinder, that board will be the full length of the log. So it might be a full 16 feet if it's as close to a perfect cylinder as possible. As well, with the diameter of the log, a small diameter log is going to usually yield a narrow opening face, and a large diameter log will give you a wider opening face. So once you start getting into oversized logs, this first board might be 6 inches wide and 8 or 10 feet long. It's always gonna be more than what your minimum face or your minimum opening face that you set will be. So now we have the same log, we're finished on face 1, we rotate 180 degrees to get to face 2. Now where we start face 2, we have 2 options. Our first option is to reference the slab side and cut in, or we can reference this flat side and cut off of that flat side. Now since we're talking MOF, we're going to be cutting from our slab side. So again, on face 2, we're going to make our first cut, remove the slab, have an opening face, and our second cut, we're going to make a live edge board. And now exactly with MOF, it's going to be exactly the same on every face. We'll have an opening face, and from our second board, we're going to make a piece of dimensioned lumber from that live edge board. So the faces in MOF doesn't matter. 1, 2, 3, and 4, they all get treated exactly the same. The difference is, and what we touched on in the last video, is what we're left with this cant size is going to be completely random. So that's why in my experience, you'll see people, or you'll use MOF on face 1, 2, 3, and 4 for hardwoods, because hardwoods, you always want to get the most out of the outside of your log. The highest grade, the most money comes from the outside of your log, and what you're left with in the middle doesn't really matter. Now, what about on a portable sawmill? Now, obviously with a portable sawmill, you're not going to have a 2D scanner or a 3D scanner. If you're lucky, you have a laser line, but you might not even have a laser line on a sawmill. And a portable sawmill, and you don't really need one, but it's certainly 100% a game changer. If you don't, this is going to come back to, okay, well, let's start from the beginning. Where on this log, if this is a horizontal bandsaw, where on this log am I going to start my cut? Now in this situation, we're talking about MOF, so we're going to be cutting from the top down, working from the outside in. So let's say we're sawing for grade, or a customer wants a grade. Again, it's same thing as in the commercial sawmill. What's the smallest product we want to make? We don't want to waste our time cutting 1x1s or 1x2s. If the customer's smallest product is 1x4, but they want mostly 6/4 6 or whatever it is. So again, it's coming back to that smallest product that the customer wants to buy. So now, if we go back to our log orientation video, we want to be cutting from the small end diameter, working towards the large end, making that diverging cut. And why that is, so now this is the small end diameter of this log that's on the sawmill. Where do we start cutting? Well, if we know that our smallest product that the customer wants to buy is a 1x4, there's no point to making an opening face of 3 inches unless there's a wane tolerance, but we won't get into wane tolerance right now. So let's say the smallest product that this customer wants to buy is a 1x4, however long, 6 feet or longer. So we're on the small end diameter. Let's say we have our tapers correct, or there's no taper to this log. What we can do is take our tape measure, figure out where 4 inches bisects at the top, and then if the face of this log should be fairly clean, let's say, take a lumber crayon and just draw that line. Draw that 4-inch line, so that we know after our second cut, so this is where our first cut's going to be, because we know that right there is 4 inches. And now we're doing 1x4, we're doing 2x4s, 6/4 4, it doesn't really matter. After our second cut, however thick it is, the thickness doesn't matter. We know once we re-edge this board, this is going to be 4 inches wide. And then since we're on the small end diameter and we're making a diverging cut, this board should be, as long as our taper is correct, should be more than long enough for what our customer wants. So to me, on a portable sawmill with a horizontal band, that's going to be your easiest way to know where do I start cutting the log, is to literally measure and then draw a line with a lumber crayon or a Sharpie or whatever you got. Now obviously that's going to be very slow, but the more you do that, the more you practice, the easier it'll be to either not kind of skip that step and to have an idea of kind of what this slab, how thick that slab should be, and then eyeball it from there. As well, you could simply just lower your cutting head, take your saw, cut into it a little bit, back it off, take a look, yeah, that looks good, and then push through the whole log. But so no laser line, no scanner, and that comes down to just experience and feel, and ideally once you know kind of how thick your slab should be, you'll have an idea of, okay, this slab is this thick and that should yield me an opening face of this wide, which more or less just comes down to time behind the saw. But this will be the easiest way to kind of get into making sure you're not wasting time by making products that are too small, or trying to really make the most out of it, but then you you cut your slab way too thin, and then you got to come back and drop your saw head 1/2 inch and make another cut. And if you're doing that 4 faces on every log, you're going to be wasting a lot of time. But that's about it, and thanks for watching.